The other day I came in here to get a bite to eat, and there was a nice kid working behind the counter. We had a good exchange, I suppose, and we got to the end of it, and just as he was handing me the receipt, a coworker barked at him about something, and this guy was over it. He didn't melt down or anything, but he just closed his eyes, and when he opened his eyes, it was like he didn't work there anymore. He'd made the decision already. He took his visor off and just gently placed it on the counter. He pulled a cigarette out of his pocket right there at the cash register, lit the thing up, took one good puff on the thing, and just walked out the door. And I thought, you know what, man? If you're gonna quit a job, that is not a bad way to do it. Segue. So here's what we're doing today. First, we're gonna talk about Acts chapter 18, where Paul has an epic quit moment with a very frustrating situation he's been dealing with for a long time. Then, we're gonna kick around a question that relates more to you and me, which is, when is it time to just walk away from a broken situation or a broken relationship? Here are some links to previous videos that will help set the context for Paul's relationship with the Jewish people that we're going to be talking about today. And in just a second, I'm going to put the full text of Acts 18, 1 through 11 on the screen for 3 pausable seconds so you can read it for yourself. And we're going to do that now. Part 1 of this thing has Paul going from Athens to Corinth, where he meets Priscilla and Aquila. Aquila's the dude, Priscilla's the lady. And they're Jewish Roman Christians who got booted out of Rome by Claudius, who was emperor from 41 AD to 54 AD. He's a fairly competent, no-nonsense emperor, and he had some kind of problem with Jews who liked somebody that the ancient historian Suetonius called Christus. And so we assume that this Christus guy was probably Jesus. And so all the Jews get expelled because Claudius just doesn't want to mess with it. So in this erratic moment from this emperor, 2 really important people in the whole story of Acts, Priscilla and Aquila, end up in Corinth, where I think they providentially meet Paul, because this relationship between these 3 people is going to produce really important good results in not only Corinth, but later in Ephesus. So store those names away. Paul sets up shop with them. They're all tent makers, so they have that in common, and everybody loves camping. And then he does what he's been doing for a long time, which is he just goes to the synagogue and talks with Jews and Greeks alike, trying to convince them to believe in Jesus. In part 2, Silas and Timothy show up from Macedonia, so now Paul has got the team back together. He's got a couple of wingmen, and he puts his focus on working with the Jewish people. Now, I would see why he'd want to wait for his wingmen, because almost every time he's tried to interact with this crowd on these missionary trips he's been on, he ends up getting hit with rocks or something stupid happens. So he's got these guys in tow, and he goes and he talks with the Jews, and they do what they always do. They opposed Paul and became abusive. We can fill in the gap mentally as to what kind of abuse this was, but we know that that term doesn't mean something light, given what we've seen in the context. Paul is over it. This is his quitting moment. This is the moment where he says, fine. There is my visor. Here is my metaphorical cigarette. Metaphorical. Don't turn it off because of the metaphorical cigarette. And he takes his deep drag on the metaphorical cigarette and is like, I'm done. Your blood be on your own heads. I have had enough. Paul follows up his epic quit moment by literally walking next door and telling somebody else about Jesus. He goes to the house of a guy named Titius Justus. There's so many different ways to pronounce that, and I challenge you to find one that doesn't make you uncomfortable when you say it out loud on camera. So however you want to pronounce this guy's name, the move to his house turns out to be a very good thing. Implicit in Paul's remarks are, hey, if I take this thing to the Gentiles and we quit with your crap, things are going to go better and people are going to respond. And that's what happens. People do respond, including Jewish people. It says that a guy named Crispus, who was the ruler of that synagogue, actually sides with Paul and signs up for the Jesus thing, as well as his whole household. So really good stuff comes out of this, and it looks like Paul is vindicated in making this move just by how it shakes out. But I'm guessing you and I are a lot alike in this sense. Sometimes it doesn't matter how sure you are of a thing. When you're in that place where you're staring at the ceiling, laying awake at night after a difficult confrontation, it's easy to second guess yourself. But in this particular case, something supernatural happens and Paul receives a reassurance that he's going to lean on. In verse 9 it says, "One night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. Don't be afraid. Keep on speaking. Don't be silent. For I'm with you and no one's going to attack you and harm you because I have many people in this city." And then the thing wraps up saying that he hung around there for a long time because of that promise. I would love to get that kind of reassurance every time I'm really over a barrel. In my lifetime, that has not happened in that specific or literal a way. But I've also never been in a place where the stakes were as high for me as they always were for Paul. For me, that would be a reassurance and a convenience. For Paul, these words were more than just a pat on the back and an attaboy. This was something he needed to continue to be where it seems like God wanted him to be, and to continue to stick to guns that it seems like God wanted him to stick to. There are a couple of reasons that I think are important. It introduces us to Aquila and Priscilla, who are going to play big later, I promise. Also, it helps the reader understand how this thing went from the completion of the Jewish religion and something that was exclusively Jewish to something that had Jewish involvement but turned out to be for the whole world and turned out to be something that was really attractive to a lot of very not Jewish people. To you and me, well, we think of everything as being for everybody, no big deal. To the original audience, that would have been a pressing question. And this is a key pivotal moment in the process of that all shaking out. Additionally, I think it's in here because it's just a very human, honest account of Paul taking a whole bunch of abuse. And the whole time, if you've been paying attention, you've been wondering, like, at what point does a guy just say, fine, enough then? Well, apparently, at this point, the guy just says, fine, enough then. And immediately, good results follow that decision. All of us at one point or another have been in a bad situation or a busted up relationship where we're faced with the question of whether we just keep banging our head against the wall trying to make this better, or whether it might be time to move on as graciously and in as much peace as possible. It can be hard to know the difference between the two, and ideally we try to fix it, right? I mean, redemption is the most beautiful story. And when we take something that seems like it's beyond repair and we find a way against all odds to make it better, it's not just good for us, it's good for everybody we overlap with. But if we're being realists, we know that isn't always the case. One reason that I think sometimes we just need to move on is because the collateral damage being done by the ongoing relationship or ongoing situation is so great that we owe it to everyone to just stop. Sometimes relationships break. Doesn't matter why, they just can't be put back together. And we continue to hurt people as we continue to try to operate in close proximity to someone we just can't operate with. We partner with people because we're better together and we can get more done together, more redemptive stuff together. But that partnership can be obliterated by our inability to just have a functional relationship. And when that's the case, sometimes I think it's okay to say we'd probably be more effective and operate in more peace and have more net good if we gave each other some space and did this thing from a distance. Another reason that it makes sense to move on sometimes is that one party has made it crystal clear that they are out. If somebody's done and they're really done and they've told you that, you can become the problem very quickly by continuing to pursue them and get after them in ways that are really beyond your control. There are things that we can do in the name of trying to make it better that are actually really destructive and borderline illegal. Sometimes if somebody says, I'm through with you, as much as it hurts, we just need to accept that and graciously move on. Sometimes we can't get the other person to the table and we just have to accept it. A third reason that it might be time to move on is because things are simply irreconcilable. I watched a show on Netflix recently where a dude has his dead wife come back to life, not as a zombie, but like just as a perfectly functional person a couple years after she died. But he's already remarried to her good friend afterwards. And nobody really did anything wrong, but they're just all in a living room arguing with each other because they're both married to the same dude. And it was kind of an accident. Well, that's a ridiculous scenario, but it's irreconcilable. Like, decisions have been made, and we're not doing the polygamy thing. It's not fixable. And sometimes in the process of our interactions, we can make decisions in conflict and tension that you can't unmake. You just can't go back and put it back together. And so it's just broken. We can't partner up anymore. This is never going to work right anymore. What can you do? At that point, I think Christians owe each other forgiveness. Christians are always obligated to forgive, but some things just can't be reconciled. And it's okay to know the difference between the two and to accept those irreconcilable situations as what they are. And again, graciously move on in peace. Those are just my thoughts. This is a very difficult subject. Paul was not flippant about this thing. I promise you, he agonized over this choice. And I know that we agonize over the choice to move on from difficult stuff. But it's a part of life. And if we don't have a thoughtful, set of standards and ideas for how we answer the question of when it's time to move on, we can easily fall into just being damaging and reckless and have grace and an eye for peace and redemption not even be a part of our thought process. What I'm saying is this. I think that there is a way to part ways with people in situations where good things come of it and more peace and more grace are achieved in the process, but it takes a ton of maturity and a ton of intentionality. I will get back to you when I have actually executed that properly in my own life. In the meantime, I guess we're just kicking it around together. I'm just going to make sense this time, Tina. And it's going to be good. Okay, I'm going to. Thank you for saying that.